Hi everyone, today we'll be going through the part 2 of gene mutation. Alright, we'll be focusing on sickle cell anemia. Now as you can see from the diagram, okay, sickle cell anemia has to do with the red blood cell, okay, and very specifically, okay, it is caused by a special protein, okay, that forms the hemoglobin within the red blood cell. Alright, so as we move along, we will see how a typical change in the gene structure has caused this to happen. Okay, gene involved in sickle cell anemia controls the hemoglobin production, right? And a normal gene produces a normal hemoglobin, which we call hemoglobin A. Now, a change in the gene structure, okay, produces what we call hemoglobin S. Now, hemoglobin S has very huge impact on the shape of the red blood cell. Okay, I'll be also linking a video below this lesson on SLS, whereby you can see it in form of animation. All right. Now you can also be able to understand about the impacts of a sickle-shaped red blood cell. Okay, basically, a normal red blood cell, okay, has a biconcave shape, right? And this biconcave shape is because of the lack of the nucleus, right? But within the red blood cell, this is actually filled with and contains hemoglobin, right? So the hemoglobin inside, you can imagine now is being changed in structure because of this gene mutation. All right. Now, and this causes it to have a very different shape altogether. And this shape causes the red blood cell to be unable to carry oxygen as efficiently as before. All right. Now, and this change in shape also causes the red blood cell to clump together. And this is very drastic in impact, because when red blood cells clump together, effectively it is going to cause a narrowing of the blood vessels in which they flow through, right? And this disease is can be fatal, all right, because of the depletion in oxygen levels in the body. Okay. Now, in the video itself, it's also going to explain to you some of the symptoms and some of the conditions that a sickle cell anemic person might face in life, all right, which causes the sufferers to actually die young. All right, so let's take a look at hemoglobin A and S. Okay, so it is still hemoglobin molecules coming together, all right, but so they're almost the same except for this one amino acid. All right, now this causes a change in the shape of this hemoglobin molecule, which causes it to clump together, making the shape sickle shaped. All right, so you see over here that the impact is like that. Okay, so the clumping together allows the blood flow to be impeded and also cause some narrowing of the lumen in which it flows through. All right, so as you can see, hemoglobin is actually found inside the red blood cell. Okay, now a normal hemoglobin A, all right, causes the red blood cell to be able to be elastic, okay, to go and flow through the narrow, or rather to go and flow through the vessels, okay, the blood vessels easily, right? Now, with the shape change, okay, due to the abnormal hemoglobin over here inside the sickle cell red blood cell, okay, now this causes a lot of blockage in terms of blood flow, okay, because of the shape, it tends to clump together. All right, on a genetic level, on a gene level, right, how will a person be result in how will it result in a person inheriting this gene, right? Okay, so gene mutation is actually recessive, this condition itself, okay, and it expresses itself only when you have a recessive allele, both recessive alleles coming together. All right, so this will cause the formation of abnormal hemoglobin in the red blood cell and cause a sickle shape to be produced. All right, and this interferes with the oxygen carrying capacity. We like to use this phrase, so make sure that you remember this. Okay, oxygen carrying capacity, okay, of the red blood cell, and it makes the red blood cells also fragile. Now, because it is a homozygous condition, all right, people who have been infected are those who have inherited both both recessive alleles, all right. So because once they inherit these recessive alleles, okay, and they are so-called with this condition of sickle cell anemia, okay, they will die young, and most of the time they will die before producing. So actually, if they do not pass on the genes inside their gametes, alright, the harmful allele should have been eliminated. However, okay, they are still present in the population, very rarely, okay, even till today, in a very remote part of Africa, okay, where malaria is prevalent. Okay, so it so happens that with this condition of sickle cell anemia, right, people are actually a bit more resistant to malaria, okay, because of the very fact that malaria is, or rather the malaria disease actually requires a red blood cell to transmit itself throughout the body. Okay, so if the red blood cells are not functioning properly, or rather the transportation capacity is impeded during within the condition of the sickle cell anemia, this causes malaria to be not so fatal, all right, in these individuals. And I'm talking about those people who have actually what's that called, they are actually inheriting, okay, heterozygous alleles. All right, so means they have one normal allele and one recessive allele. So actually, when we are talking about their red blood cell count, okay, so part of their red blood cell will be abnormal. Okay, and I'm talking for those people who are heterozygous in nature. Okay, their red blood cell count, part of them will be abnormal, which is sickle shape. Okay, and part of their red blood cell count will be normal, okay, which is biconcave shape. All right. Oh, sorry. All right. Okay, so these people, they actually do survive because although they carry the allele, phenotypically they are normal, all right? So they produce a portion of, or rather their RBC count, a portion of them are abnormal. They are still able to survive. It can still able to be reproducing human beings, right? Now, so they are actually more resistant to malaria than those with two copies, okay? And reason being that malaria requires red blood cells, or rather they transmit through red blood cells. So in fact, if these people who are heterozygous, they have red blood cells, there are a few of them, or rather a portion of their red blood cells is sickle shape, okay, they will suffer less from the attack of malaria, right? Because malaria involves a parasite, okay, a parasite that is infecting the red blood cell. So should a portion of the red blood cell be sickle-shaped, malaria parasite, okay, cannot be transmitted so effectively. Alright? Okay, so heterozygous individuals actually have a better chance of surviving and reproducing in these regions where malaria is prevalent, right? Since they do not fully contact either of the diseases. Okay, so basically they are still able to, their bodily function is still able to grow, reproduce, all right? And this selection ensures that the recessive allele persists in the population. So even though this allele is present in a heterozygous way, okay, it is still there and it still exists in this population. Okay, another mutation that we want to look at is actually not not a gene mutation, but a chromosomal mutation. Now, chromosomal mutation means that, okay, we do have an existing typical set, okay, of 23 pairs of chromosome, or what we call 46 single chromosomes, right? Now, some people, they have inherited one extra chromosome. So that means that they have 47 chromosomes instead in their body cells. So when we line all the chromosomes up together, we see that there's one extra, okay, to a certain pair, right, within the body. Now, the one that we want to look at is actually Down syndrome. And this is a condition whereby, okay, the person has inherited an extra chromosome 21. Okay, so we call this a trisomy because tri means three, okay, trisomy means 3 chromosomes of 21, okay, of chromosome 21. Now, so what happened? Normally, a typical zygote, right, would inherit one chromosome from one parent, right? So 1 plus 1 will have, so they will have 2, right? And that's why they come in pairs, right? So what happened so that there's a trisomy condition, right, or trisomy occurrence, right, is during meiosis. Okay, normally the pairs of homologous chromosomes will separate and go into different poles of the dividing cells. So sometimes one pair did not divide, so the whole pair will go to one spot, right? Now this causes one cell to have 24 chromosomes while the other has 22. Now this event is called a non-disjunction. So let's take a look over here, right? So you have what? One parent, two parent, one male, one female, all right, and the gametes are actually supposed to inherit one each, right, during meiosis, the reductive division, right? So what happens is that over here, the female chromosome, the female cell did not undergo meiosis as per it's supposed to be, all right, and that caused both, okay, copies of chromosome 21 to be inherited into a single gamete, right? And what happens is that upon fertilization, okay, the chromosomes over here was inherited into this cell, and another one, okay, which was this one, okay, was inherited to this particular cell, and therefore you have a zygote with 3 copies of chromosome 21. Right? So this is called trisomy 21. So if we line them all up in a chart like this, right, we do see an extra 21 chromosome here. Okay. Now, so Down syndrome, it is a condition, okay, and we can see them in terms of facial features. It's a little bit different, okay. Now, it also has impact on a person's cognitive development, all right, and also physical development. Now, when we talk about mutation, whether it's gene mutation or chromosome mutation, all right, there are certain mutagenic agents. Now, agents means these, or rather these conditions or these factors come into play when it comes to mutation. So these are factors that will cause mutation, okay. Now, the rate of spontaneous okay, mutation is actually very low. Spontaneous means happens by natural means. All right. Now, so natural means it's actually very low, right? But when these factors come into play, it actually greatly increases the rate of and the chances of mutation happening. Okay, so these are some of the mutagens. All right. Now, ultraviolet light, okay, gamma rays, alpha, beta, and gamma radiation, okay, and other chemicals. Now, this is why, let's say, all right, or in cases whereby there is power plant, or rather radioactive plant, what's that called? Explosion. All right. Now, this causes a lot of harm, all right, on the gene that is of, let's say, a mother, right? So normally they will ask everyone to evacuate, especially the mothers, right? Because those who are pregnant, let's say, okay, these mutagenic agents can definitely impact the gene formation, all right, to mutate the genes of the zygote or of the fetus that is within the mother lah. Okay, so these have very strong influence, okay, over the people over there, right? So with extended exposure to all these mutagenic agents, okay, it is going to definitely be able to cause gene or chromosomal mutations in these people. All right. Now, so okay, so for radiation, you have UV light, X-ray, alpha, beta radiation, and also gamma rays. Okay, and for chemicals, we have mustard gas, okay, formaldehyde, okay, and LSD as well. All right. Now, mutation, okay, is basically a change in genetic structure, okay, or in chromosomal structures as well. All right. So we go back to the beginning, right, of what mutations are. Okay, so we go back to the definition of it. Okay, so I just want to at this point highlight what's the definition. Okay, so it's a sudden random change in the structure of a gene or in the chromosomal number. All right, so we have gone through a few, and mutations in general can be further classified into harmful, right, like that of sickle cell anemia, okay, Down syndrome, which disrupt the normal cell functions. Okay, now there are beneficial mutations whereby these changes bring about maybe more advantageous phenotypes, okay, or maybe more advantageous characteristics or traits of a living organism. All right, so when it is a good mutation, a good random and sudden change in either the structure of the gene or the chromosomal number, okay, it offers individuals a better, sometimes like in animals, okay, better ability to camouflage, okay, and that helps them to avoid predators, right? And when they don't die, okay, they are able to develop, reproduce, okay, and leave more offspring than the individuals without the beneficial mutation. All right. It also increases the frequency of the mutant allele in the population. So when a beneficial mutation exists within a living organism's population, they grow, develop, and reproduce. Okay, the offspring also has chances of inheriting these advantageous alleles. Okay, and this will cause new characteristics to arise after many years. Okay, remember it is a new addition to the characteristics of that gene pool. Okay, because it is a new or a sudden random change, right? So it has never happened before. Now it is new, but it is so beneficial. It allows, or rather, this is now included within this gene pool. Okay, and the new species now have new characteristics that are good, more favorable, more advantageous. Okay, and it will continue to thrive within this community. All right. Now, in summary, okay, mutation is sudden or spontaneous change in the structure of the gene or the chromosomal number. Okay, and it may be inheritable, right? So these mutations may persist in a population if it is allowed to be inherited in the offspring. Okay, if it's beneficial, right, the offspring will have a longer lifespan, let's say. Okay, and this is going to cause persistence in this allele, in this gene pool. Okay, and this is seen in sickle cell anemia. Okay, the reason why sickle cell anemia, or rather hemoglobin S formation, is not eradicated from the community is because it has its perks, especially in the malaria community. Okay, so it has been able to exist in this community. All right. Now, mutations also produce variations and some diversity in the population of the organisms. All right. And like I said, right, before, that variation has got its benefits as well. Okay. Now, so now we're talking about new sudden random changes in gene structure, chromosomes, and chromosome numbers. Right now, this causes new genes, new characteristics, new phenotypes to be introduced to the population, and this is what we call variation. Okay, so when you do have new alleles, new genes, right, or even new chromosomes. Okay, now these variations can arise due to the moment when we have fertilization, right? And so this means that this is during meiosis. Okay, so we have crossing over and independent assortment of chromosomes during meiosis, okay, and random fertilization as well. So this causes differences in the inherited genes, alleles, and chromosomes. Okay, now when we have this, right, okay, it also gives rise to mutation in the genetic material. Okay, now mutation provides new alleles to the gene pool for natural selection to act on. Okay, so a gene pool is basically an entire combination of all the alleles, all the types of genes, okay, of a particular species. Now, genetic variation is very important to help organisms adapt and survive in changing environment. Okay, so just now we mentioned natural selection. What is natural selection? You break down the words natural selection. It's basically for nature to take its course to select the organisms that are actually able to survive the best. Okay, So natural selection is a process that ensures the best adapted. Okay, so we call them best adapted. Okay, best adapted organisms in the population to survive and also to reproduce so that they can pass on the genes to the next generation. Okay, so adaptation, okay, has to do with a certain structural change or certain trait, okay, that has changed that allows for a living organism's functions. Okay, right? So for example, we talk about maize plant. Okay, maize plant, like a corn plant. Okay, so a corn plant, let's say, it can survive in normal conditions, and that is good, right? Now, what about when natural disaster strikes, like for example, locusts? Okay, locusts that feed on the maize plant. Now, wouldn't it be good, okay, for a maize plant to undergo some form of mutation so that it can be resistant to, let's say, or rather it can ward off the locusts, right? So if let's say a mutation happens to the maize plant and it allows this maize plant to be able to survive locust, a disaster like a locust infection, okay, and cause it to be able to still grow and reproduce, okay, and in this next generation the same genes follows through and is inherited to the offspring, okay, we will call this maize plant a more advantageous, okay, a more adaptable, okay, and a more and basically naturally selected what's that called, not inferior, but it is a more, how to say, powerful, right? It's more powerful compared to the rest who have not gone through this mutation process, right? So nature selects the varieties of organisms that are, number one, more resistant to diseases, okay, and number two, better adapted to changes in the environment. So for example, the example that I gave, right, about the locust infection, this is a change to the environment of the maize plants, right? And so through this process of natural selection, okay, immediately, or rather a result of this natural selection will be that you have the more dominant, or rather the more advantageous living organism being able to survive and reproduce itself, right? Okay, so the more superior living organism, okay, will be able to survive and pass on their genes to the next organism. Alright, now the process by which these present complex forms of living things or living organisms have arisen from the simpler ancestral forms is called evolution. Right? So through time, we have processes whereby it allows for only the more superior living organisms to be able to grow, develop, and reproduce itself, and eventually pass on their genes to the next generation. Okay, so who came up with this theory of natural selection? Okay, it's the same reasons why some living organisms of the past, like dinosaurs, okay, we know that they have roamed the world, or rather they existed on Earth, right? We know that we can see that from the fossils that they have left behind, that we have what's that called? That we have archaeologists that actually found all these fossil fuels, right? We know that they were around, but how come they're not around now, right? So this is because of the theory of natural selection. This is not nature selection, but natural. Okay, now Charles Darwin was the one who developed this theory. based on the following principles, right? All species tend to produce more offspring than the environment can support, right? So basically, there is a limited resource, okay, and there's finite resources, okay, that is able to support the offspring of a certain species. Okay, number two, environmental pressures such as competition for food, territory, and mates are also present. Okay. Now, number three, individuals with variations best adapted to survive and reproduce. Okay, they are the ones who can pass on their genes to the next generation. Okay, so we have from this theory, okay, this principle, okay, the survival of the fittest, right? So this is what it means, right? That those who are better adapted, they will survive, and when they survive, they are able to develop and they reproduce. Okay, offspring of survivors will inherit their advantageous characteristics and remain well adapted for the environment. All right, so these are the four principles, very important principles that supports the theory of natural selection. All right. Now, so how did Charles Darwin actually come up with this theory? Okay, he's actually a bird watcher, and he was focusing on the Galapagos finches, which is a type of bird. Now, he realized that the ancestral type of this species of bird, okay, it has a certain beak of this shape. Okay, so he called it a typical mainland type. Now he realized that over time, okay, there was an existence, or rather the birth of the same types of Galapagos finches, but then now the beaks were then different. Okay, the beaks were then different. Now then the beaks actually were adapted to their food source, right? Obviously. Now, so their beaks now had different features, or rather different characteristics. Okay. Now, and they were called different types of finches now. All right. And so, how were these beaks able to come into existence, right? So how did they inherit genes that were not previously existing in the ancestral type of finches, right? So we have to, the only way that could have happened for them to have inherited and developed such beaks of different forms and different shapes, right, was because of mutation, right? So mutation happened to tweak the genes a little bit here and there, so that these mutated genes gave rise to offspring that were of different beak types, and these beak types have actually put them in an advantage, okay, to be able to feed on these common prey or food source, okay, that were probably dependent on the environment that they were in, right? So it could be the food source that was made available, right? So only those with mutated genes, with mutated genes, yes, which gave rise to different types of beaks, they were able to, only these birds were able to survive and reproduce, right? So over time, Charles Darwin saw that, hey, evolution has caused, all these simpler ancestral forms to pass away, die off, okay? But then the present complex forms of the living organisms have risen from these simpler forms, right? So this is a few things that work over here: natural selection, right, and evolution. Okay, so what is evolution per se, right? Evolution goes like this: organisms will reproduce rapidly as food supply is very abundant. Okay, and this will come back to it as a basis of ecology also lah. All right, okay. Organisms will definitely, if everything is good and ideal, okay, food supply is very very abundant, organisms will grow, and they will grow very fast, right? And they will reproduce also very fast. Now, but then when organisms migrate to different environment, okay, because let's say there's competition, okay, there's finite food source, and there's too many organisms, so that causes migration to happen, right? Okay, so now spontaneous mutation takes place, right? And so when there's migration, organisms of different types, maybe they are introduced to each other, right? And on a genetic level, probably mutations can also take place. Now, and this results in the variation of the organisms, right? Now, so offsprings that have inherit these different genes, right? Now, they might exhibit favorable traits that offers a selective advantage. Now, this is a terminology that you must learn to use, right? So, if they are of a superior type, or they possess a superior characteristic, we call them to have, we say that they have a selective advantage. Okay, and these organisms, because they are superior, they are able to survive, reproduce, and pass on their favorable genes to their offspring. Now, when this happens, okay, we see more of these genes in the offspring from generation to generation to generation, and these organisms will become a predominant species in their environment. Now, what is the opposite? What if organisms fail to have selective advantage, right? We will see that they are either nearing extinction, or they are already extinct, right? So this is the entire mechanism of evolution, right? So the fittest, the survival is for the fittest, for the most adapted, okay, those who have selective advantage and those who have favorable genes. Okay, so that is for natural selection, means letting nature take its course, right? Using the mechanisms of and the theories, okay, allowing evolution to take place, allowing the natural forms of reproduction, okay, fertilization, etc., etc. Okay, so what happens when we fail to, or rather we fail to we want to go against natural selection, okay, then there's also something called artificial selection, whereby it's manipulated by human beings, right? So what we can do with the intervention of human beings is that plants and animals with desirable traits that we know that are good and advantageous can be also artificially selected through breeding, okay, and we can call this artificial breeding, right? So what are some of the examples of very good traits that we would like in our food, in our animals, right? Now, plants that are in high content, oil content, okay, disease resistant, sweet fruits, okay, good meat, even in our poultry, right, high milk production, good quality fur, for example. So all these are good and desirable traits. So what we can do, or rather breeders, those with who have a business motivation, right? Breeders can first analyze the seeds of the different plants, okay, and select plants that are producing seeds with high oil content. Okay, so in the course of breeding, in the course of reaping the seeds that are sown, right? If they find that, hey, there's one plant that produces a lot of oil content. Okay, so that might be the plant whose seeds they want to use for the next time round. Okay, so they do breeding. They allow good seeds to grow, okay, and into new plants and self-fertilize. So we call it self-fertilization, right? Because we want to use a common gene pool that is of the advantageous desirable trait, right? So that makes the highest oil content seeds that are selected and used again as parents for the next generation. Okay, now after many generations, we find that all these genes are very similar. These plants that you are breeding with each other, okay, they are very similar, and they are called purebred now. Okay, there's not much of a variance in the types of genes that they have. Okay, so pure breeded plants that produce seeds with desirable qualities can be obtained, and then they can self-pollinate so that they can pass on the genes for the next generation. Okay, now if we do want to see some kind of variation in this manipulated and artificial form of selection, we call it hybridization. Okay, so that means that we do crossbreeding of two different types of varieties, each with their own favorable trait, okay, to produce offspring with both favorable trait. Okay, so for example, I want a rice that can give me high nutrition, okay, and I also want my rice to be resistant to pests. So I will find two parents, okay, of this advantageous trait. I'll breed them together, and that's called crossbreeding, okay, to give me a hybrid that has two favorable traits that are existing inside their offspring. Okay, so when we talk about natural and artificial selection, these are the differences. Okay, now natural selection is really pretty much a result of mutations in the gene. Okay, in terms of Charles Darwin's finches that he observed, okay, there was no artificial manipulation by human beings to cause such a change in the shape of their beaks. Okay, so it's really pretty much about nature, okay, allowing mutation to happen, and for this mutation to be seen in the different generations of the finches. Okay, now artificial selection, we can call it a manipulation by human intervention. Okay, now and for natural selection, it is brought about by environmental changes. Okay, so what causes this mutation to happen is really when the finches have gone to different environments, which causes them to not be able to survive had they have the conventional beak, right? The traditional beak. Okay, they wouldn't be able to survive because of the new environment changes. Okay, and so mutation has had happened such that only the fittest were able to survive. The most adaptable was able to survive. Okay, for artificial selection, the humans select the organisms with the desired traits to reproduce. Okay, so think about the crossbreeding, right, and the breeding of living organisms by human beings, right? Now, what about the speed of the process? Natural selection goes for many, many years, okay? But artificial selection, okay, very, very fast. Okay, natural selection may be advantageous, may be harmful, depending on the changes in the gene structure, chromosomes, or chromosomal number. Okay, but for artificial selection, okay, it is most likely to be advantageous to men. Alright, so with this, we wrap up for this topic on heredity. Okay, please look at the videos that I will be posting as well. Okay, and complete your exercises for this June holidays, and also the workbook, or rather the TYS and the workbook exercises lah. Yeah, alright, we'll see you again. I'll see you again in term 3. Thank you.